This week I'm trawling through the utterly baffling world of licensed video games. It's weird to think that we live in a time where licensed games are no longer an inevitability. Sure, they're still around now, but in the 80s and 90s it seemed that every movie and TV show had some sort of game based on it. Now these days they tend to be disposable mobile phone games, but back in the day they were on every single game system you could possibly imagine. But then there were some licenses that were pretty inappropriate subjects to adapt into a piece of interactive fiction, or some that made sense to develop into a certain genre of game but ended up as a completely different one that didn't make sense. Welcome to my list of utterly baffling licensed games. The comedy show Little Britain was one of those shows that was absolutely massive for a brief time in the 2000s but quickly disappeared without trace. A recent rewatch reminded me that this is a show of which the humour is, shall we say, a little troublesome at times. However, it did stick around long enough to get its own game on PC, PlayStation 2 and PlayStation Portable. Now the only thing worse than a licensed game based on a property that doesn't really need a video game is one that's an absolute atrocity. Little Britain, the video game, can be best summed up as worse than shovelware. It's a selection of awful minigames featuring many of the show's characters. I was hoping to capture and present footage of all of Little Britain's minigames in this video, but unfortunately you have to unlock them by earning a certain number of points, which is not exactly an entirely fun experience. After playing the first two minigames, I almost certainly did not feel the need to play any more. In this particular minigame, for example, you're skating 2 laps along an isometrically viewed track that somehow loops around even though it's perfectly straight. You need to pick up CDs to earn points while avoiding obstacles by moving around or jumping over them. The controls are annoyingly unresponsive, while the canned sound effects are irritatingly repetitive. Meanwhile, the second minigame involves Lou and Andy as they go to the local swimming baths. Playing as Andy, you must mash the X button to move him out of his wheelchair and choose from one of 3 diving boards, do a trick on it and get back to your wheelchair before Lou finishes his conversation and looks around at you. Now I can only imagine that the rest of these minigames are just as bad, if not worse. So with that said, can we just take my word that this game is a huge pile of manure that didn't need to happen and just move on, okay? Oliver Stone's 1986 film Platoon is the harrowing account of a young US Army volunteer's hellish experience on his tour of duty in 1967, and there is little in this picture that paints the violence of war as anything other than an atrocity. Famous for its soundtrack, including the beautiful musical piece Adagio for strings, as well as solid acting performances by a cast including a young Charlie Sheen, Willem Dafoe and Tom Berenger, Platoon is a hard-hitting piece of cinema. So, I think you'll agree that it's the perfect movie to adapt into an action-packed video game. Nothing is more anti-war than exploring the Viet Cong, mowing down the enemy and avoiding booby traps. It's got side-scrolling and first-person segments, and while it does feature certain elements from the movie, you do wonder what the thought process of licensing Platoon was. The thing that irritates me most about this game is that you can't walk 2 steps without an enemy appearing somewhere on the screen, at which point you'll have to deal with incredibly quickly. It is incredibly frustrating when you just want to get from point A to point B. This game was released on multiple platforms, from the Apple II, various microcomputers and even the NES version that is the footage you're currently watching from. I actually had this game on the Amstrad CPC and it came with a cassette tape of Smokey Robinson's Tracks of My Tears, just because it's on the movie soundtrack. I was 5 at the time and I wouldn't see the movie probably another decade at least, so at the time this game confused the absolute hell out of me. Still, the game itself does have a pretty good soundtrack. Let this game be a reminder to licensors and licensees that when you're working out a licensing partnership, you should at least do your homework and make an appropriate product at the end of the day. On a similar note, just because you can make a game adaptation of 1999's Fight Club does not mean that you should. Coming to PS2 and Xbox 5 years after the release of the Brad Pitt and Edward Norton starring flick, Vivendi Universal distills David Fincher's cult classic into a simplistic 3D brawler. And it's really simplistic. There are 3 different fighting styles, your brawler, street fighting and kung fu, and they all feel pretty similar and revolve around mashing the buttons until you win. Obviously, you wouldn't expect the developers to spring for the likenesses of Brad Pitt and Edward Norton, but they at least made the effort to hire Meat Loaf to reprise his role as the large-breasted pugilist Bob. But do you know what the worst thing about this game is? Limp Bizkit's Fred Durst is an unlockable character. Why? I mean, he's your reward for completing the story mode for some strange reason. What a reward, eh? Thanks for playing our shitty game, and now you can play as this arsehole. And by the way, they made sure to make him look much more athletic than he actually is in real life. Sure, the frontman of Limp Bizkit is no stranger to video games, having been a hidden character in a couple of WWE titles, but being that his inclusion here only appears to be because there are a couple of Limp Bizkit songs on its soundtrack makes it a puzzling decision. Television is no stranger to weird video game adaptations. Aussie soap Neighbours had its own game, and even 80s soap Dallas had a graphical adventure, while someone out there felt that Desperate Housewives needed its own video game too. But all of these pale in comparison when compared to Home Improvement Power Tool Pursuit for the Super Nintendo. Tim Allen's 90s sitcom was for some reason made into a game, and it is absolutely weird. Here is a standard platformer where the aim is to collect a number of crates containing Tim the Toolman Taylor's stolen tools. Now you're looking at this gameplay footage and thinking, why the hell are we in the age of the dinosaur? Well, the whole conceit is that the stolen tools have been scattered throughout the various studio lots where Tim's show Tool Time is filmed. These lots are the locations for filming various genres of movie, so it gives the game the excuse of having levels featuring prehistoric dinosaurs and fire ants, as well as stages set in Egyptian pyramids and visions of the future. As you can imagine, Tim's offensive techniques include the use of various power tools such as nail guns and chainsaws, etc. The premise of the game is incredibly dumb, as is the idea of creating a licensed game around such a pedestrian sitcom. Still, at least this game is somewhat playable, if a little generic. Some of the games on this list are inappropriate because they contradict the source material's themes or messages, or were just grossly unnecessary in the first place. Stargate for the Game Boy seems to grossly misunderstand what the movie it's based on is all about. In the 90s we were used to licensed games being action platform games, so when the developers tried something different, of course, it was not welcome. But when I think of the 1994 sci-fi movie Stargate, what I don't think of is a Tetris style puzzle game. Despite an endless mode and battle modes for single and two players, it's not exactly an enthralling falling block puzzler. You're given several glyphs at the top of the screen, and you need to align columns of 3 for each glyph to make them disappear and tick them off the list. It's not even that bad a game, if a little dull, but it does make you wonder what the entire point of slapping the Stargate license on this was. Sure, there are hieroglyphics and occasional appearances by the characters from the movie, but it's not exactly making the best use of the license. We finish up with a license that has so many video games based on it already. In fact, a new one is still released every year. Games based on the pro wrestling world of WWE are still popular, even if they've been of mixed quality in recent years. However, the game we are looking at here falls into the what were they thinking category. WWE Crush Our takes your favourite and not so favourite WWE superstars, TM, and puts them into stupid looking cars. Then they take part in a car combat scenario in the Twisted Metal vein, where you're put into an arena and have to score points for different actions depending on the type of match you're playing, of which they're all named after various WWE events. Most of the time you'll have to destroy your opponents to get points, but other times you'll need to collect stars and things like that. It's a silly idea, especially as the narrative reasons for Crush Hour taking place is a world where the WWE have taken control over all TV networks, with their latest show being Crush Hour. Taking place in single events or an entire season mode is unfortunately a little bit boring. It's a low budget, poor man's Twisted Metal. Only it's dull and there's an unnecessary license tacked on. It wouldn't be a badly thought out license without some awful repeating voice clips either, while the in-game commentary is just so badly done to the point where it's laughable. You try and keep a straight face when Jim Ross tells you that someone has twisty rockets with the most disjointed intonation in his voice.
Kurt Angle just snatched the twisty rockets.
So there you have it, a selection of licensed video games that range from the ridiculous to the completely unnecessary. It doesn't help that not one of these licensed video games is actually any good, but such is the way of these sort of things. I'll be back next week with another trip into the world of video games, but until then, thank you very much for watching and happy gaming.